It's been a little over a month since that tragic accident involving Air India Flight AI171 that was bound for London Gatwick but unfortunately crashed shortly after takeoff from runway 23 at Ahmedabad Airport in the western part of India. 241 passengers and crew on board were killed, with only one miraculous survivor, a passenger who was later established to have been occupying a seat near the emergency exit section. On this particular scheduled flight, Air India was operating a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, which was manufactured in the year 2013 in the United States by the Boeing company. Soon thereafter, investigations got underway to establish the cause of this particular accident. And so, a couple of days ago, India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau published preliminary findings giving a blow-by-blow account of the events leading to this particular accident. And so today we are going to delve into that report. But before we do that, it is important to note that according to the International Civil Aviation Organization, that is ICAO, standards and practices, investigations are for the sole objective of preventing accidents and incidents and not to apportion blame or liability. And this is actually in line with India's aircraft investigations of accidents and incidents rules of 2017. There are at least 2 to 3 very notable findings captured in this report, and that have also got the attention of so many players within the aviation sector across the world. And top on that list is the whole question surrounding the fuel cutoff switches, or simply the fuel control switches, are essentially responsible for controlling the flow of fuel from the tanks to the twin General Electric engines that are fitted on this particular 787-8 Dreamliner. As per the report, at one moment during the most critical phase of this flight, the climb out phase of the flight, it was established that the fuel switches were actually moved from the run position to the cutoff position, meaning the flow of fuel to the engines was completely cut. I mean, this is literally like turning off the ignition of your car when you are driving on the highway. The engine shuts down and the car stops moving. So when the switches were moved and the flow of fuel to the engines cut off, the engines automatically flamed out, and this triggered the aircraft to lose thrust. Yet this is the critical phase of a flight where the aircraft requires maximum thrust to be able to climb out in order to achieve the required cruising levels. The second most notable finding in this report is the exchange between the two pilots. It is documented that one of the pilots is heard asking the other why he cut off, and then the other pilot is heard responding that he did not. While the report does not specify who exactly said what, we know that the co-pilot was the pilot flying, basically responsible for hand flying the aircraft at this particular stage of the flight while monitoring the conditions outside, while the pilot in command was the pilot monitoring the instrumentation to ensure all the parameters were reading correctly for that phase of flight. The report further documents that moments later, there were attempts to relight the engines by switching the fuel controls back to the run mode in an effort to recover thrusts and climb out normally. But given the very difficult circumstances and conditions, including very low altitude, below 700 feet, lost thrust, there was no substantive corrective procedure that could be undertaken at that particular point. So the only option that the pilots had was to trigger the Mayday call. Before the ATC officer could establish the call sign, the aircraft sadly crashed just outside the perimeter wall of the airport. The other outstanding aspect that has been captured in this report is the reference to the Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin by the US Civil Aviation Regulator, that is the Federal Aviation Administrator FAA, that was issued in 2018, warning of a potential disengagement of the fuel control switch locking mechanism. The locking feature or mechanism that the FAA Special Information Bulletin is making reference to is some sort of a resistance in between the positions cutoff and run of the fuel cutoff switches that prevents any accidental movement in between the positions. It's more or less like in a car where you have a gear shift lock that would prevent any accidental movement of the gear lever from the park position unless you press on the brake pedal for it to be able to move. So it's basically a safety feature. The Special Information Bulletin by the FAA advised operators to inspect the locking mechanisms on the Boeing fuel control switches. However, this wasn't mandatory, and so in that spirit, Air India, according to this report, did not undertake that inspection. Instead, what is documented in the report is that Air India replaced the Following these preliminary findings, India's civil aviation regulator directed all airlines to undertake an inspection of the locking feature on their Boeing aircrafts in their fleet. Air India has since reported to have completed this process, and they have reported to have found no defect on their 787s. The FAA and Boeing have assured the operators of the 787 variants that the fuel switches have no defect and that there is no cause for alarm. As we continue to digest and analyze these preliminary findings, the investigation into this accident advances to the next level, and we hope in the next few months we'll be able to get a better picture and a comprehensive report of the events that contributed or triggered this accident. Most importantly, we hope that the final report will manage to clarify the whole issue around the fuel cutoff switches, coupled with the conversation between the two pilots that was captured by the flight deck voice recorder, which has created a lot of speculation with regards to whether this was actually an intentional pilot-induced accident or it was an accidental toggling of the fuel cutoff switches. So until then, let's sit back, relax, and enjoy flying.